I've been thinking about doing a review of these 1 Minute Apologist videos for a while now. I don't know how many of my subscribers are subscribed to this channel also, or other channels like it, but they don't allow for comments or likes or dislikes, so they don't really allow for any kind of feedback. So I thought I'd give a little feedback. And what I'm going to do is I might just do one today. I wanted to do more than one, but I think it's going to take a little longer than expected. And I'll just go through some of the ones that have gotten the most watches and see what I can come up with as far as some responses or reactions or rebuttals, whatever you want to call them. So the one I'm going to be looking at today will be Frank Turek. So here we go.
You contend that atheists are stealing from God. What exactly are they stealing?
They're stealing from God to make their case. The book goes through an acronym, CRIMES. The C stands for causality. Bobby, why is there cause and effect? Why is the universe so orderly if there is no God, if there is no mind out there that orders all this? Why are the natural laws and forces so precise and consistent? Because there's a mind behind them. So when atheists, ironically, are using cause and effect to try and disprove God, they're actually stealing from God to argue against him.
So Turek goes through an acronym, and I'll just go through it with him and just respond as needed. The first one, causality, and then he also mentions order and precision. But causality doesn't seem to me to be something that could be enacted as a principle on something where the principle of causation were not already active. So if the universe, say you have a universe, I mean, this really isn't what Turek thinks. It's not what any Christian thinks, but it's sort of the way he's presenting it here, is you have a universe where causality is not a principle that is held constant. It's just, you have a universe, but for whatever reason, causation doesn't work. So like when Newton says, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. In Turek's sort of pre-causal universe, you have some sort of state where causation isn't a principle that is active in the universe. And then God has to say, now causation is going to be active in this universe. Well, one, of course, we're just stipulating that God has the power to do this. We're just saying God's God and he has the power and he just does it. It doesn't actually explain what's happening or how we're going from something without causation to something with causation. That's one thing. The other thing is that if causation, if you, let's say you have this universe where causation is not a principle already at work, what do you do to that universe? What do you enact upon that universe in order to make causation itself an active principle that functions? It seems to me that if causation isn't already active within a system, there's nothing you could do to it to make it, because then you're acting upon it, aren't you? I mean, so of course, this isn't ever explained really what he means. At least maybe he does in his book, but he doesn't here.
God to argue against them. The R is reason. And they're saying they're the reasonable ones, Bobby, but if their worldview is true.
Worldviews aren't true, right? A worldview is not true or false. Worldviews contain all of the elements that they contain. They contain true elements as well as false elements. So my worldview, or my view of the world, or my perspective is all-inclusive. It wouldn't make any sense to say that my perspective is the true perspective, or the only true perspective. It wouldn't be correct to say that somebody else has the true perspective or the true worldview. So this is an oversimplification to the point of really this just being misleading to try to suggest that the atheist worldview, I'm going to stop doing air quotes, to suggest that the atheist worldview were the correct worldview and that it were some sort of a monolith where it's just a phrase that means a worldview of someone who happens to not believe in a God. But that doesn't mean that even if you could demonstrate that there was or wasn't a God, you wouldn't prove the so-called truth of their worldview. You'd just demonstrate the truth or falsity of one specific claim. So they'd still have hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands of other ideas in their head that could be true or false.
If they're just molecules in motion and we're just molecules in motion, there is no immaterial realm, How does reason exist? It doesn't. We're just reacting. We're not reasoning. We're nothing but moist robots. So ironically, atheists who claim to be beacons of reason have made reason impossible by their worldview of materialism.
He hasn't suggested any reason why reason couldn't exist within a material world. He hasn't suggested any reason why material minds, brains made out of matter alone, couldn't reason. He just, probably because he's speaking to a Christian audience, the Christian audience is expected to come to the table with the presupposition that your soul or your spirit is an immaterial, kind of an immaterial person who is living inside of this physical body, and the soul person interacts with the brain matter, but that the reasoning process couldn't happen by brain alone, that you need the soul thing involved as well. And so when he's saying, how can you have reason without soul stuff, he doesn't explain why that's a serious problem. Maybe he does in his book, but he doesn't here. And so you're just supposed to read between the lines and agree with him that, of course, brains can't think. They can only think with the soul.
The I stands for information and intentionality. Information is the idea that there is a message, and when there's a message, it always comes from a mind. Well, the greatest message that's ever been discovered is in the human genome. It's 3.5 billion letters long, Bobby. It's the longest word ever discovered, and they're saying that that message doesn't come from a mind? That information doesn't come from a mind? How so? They write books filled with information, claiming that information doesn't have to come from a mind. I wonder why I should understand their books or take their books then if information doesn't come from a mind.
There's a message, and where there's a message, it always comes from a mind. Well, not so, for a couple different reasons. One is that there's a lot of information buried in everything, cells as well as all around us. If you go to the ice cores, go to the glaciers, dig down. Scientists have counted the years. They can say what the atmosphere was like, roughly. They can say how many years have passed during this, how much ice, right? Based on the idea that you have one heating and cooling cycle per year based on summer and winter. That's information. That's information that wasn't intentionally put there by a mind. There's all kinds of information that wasn't intentionally put somewhere by a mind. Looking at the string of 3.5 billion or whatever some odd digits and saying that this is a word, this is likening it to Shakespeare or something, is a mistake. I mean, the genetic code is not a literal language. It uses A's, C's, T's, and G's in the sense that those are 4 different chemical compounds, 4 different nucleobases, but they're not literal letters, and they don't make up literal words, and they don't use a literal language. They code for proteins. They code for different proteins of different shapes. The functionality and the purpose of what the proteins do is not at all the same as what a word does. I mean, if I had a protein here with you, which I do in my body, but it would be basically they function differently by being different shapes. The proteins they're this shape, or they're that shape, or they're this shape, or they're different, all these different shapes, and they connect in different ways, and they form different compounds that do different things. But that's not the same as a word. I mean, it's not even really comparable. I mean, you say a word like glass, and there's the word glass, and there's this physical thing. It's a glass. But the word glass is an abstract concept that means something only to a mind, whereas what's created by the genetic code is a physical series of objects in the material universe that doesn't require an immaterial mind to encode or decode or to understand. It's a physical piece of the universe that will behave in a certain way, and then will be acted upon by evolution. If the protein is this shape and it has a slightly more beneficial, if it works a little bit better, or if it has that shape and it works a little bit worse, then evolution has something to act on.
Intentionality has to do with the idea that the world is goal-directed. Why does an acorn always become an oak tree? Why doesn't it become an elm tree or a starfish or a seahorse? Because it's goal-directed to become an oak tree. Why do the planets go around the sun in such an orderly way? Because they're goal-directed to. You say, well, Frank, that's because of gravity. Yeah, but why is gravity doing what it does? If you go back far enough, you're ultimately going to arrive at an uncaused, first cause, sustaining creator who holds all this together.
So because the universe contains intentionality, that intentionality must come from God? Why? Why must it be that? And because the universe, it's not like every single thing within the universe is intentional. Even Turek isn't suggesting that everything within the universe is intentional, but pointing to something like an acorn and saying it's only able to make an oak tree. I mean, and actually pointing to it as a, pointing at the limitation of it. You know, it doesn't turn into a starfish. It doesn't turn into these other things. So that means it must be God because it can only do this one thing. I mean, what would we expect in a non-God designed universe? Would we expect no elements of predictability? Would we expect everything to just be random? Because that's the kind of logic we get from someone like Turek when he's talking about something like this, is that unless it was for the Christian God Yahweh, an acorn could just do whatever. But under evolution, it's perfectly predictable that the seed of a certain plant is only going to bring forth more of that plant. What else could it do? It's not surprising under evolutionary theory. It's not surprising, within a worldview that doesn't include a God. It's not surprising that the universe contains elements of intentionality. So what is it that's supposed to be inconsistent with the so-called atheist worldview? It's not clear.
The M stands for morality, and quite frankly, there can't be any objective right or wrong unless God exists. So when atheists are saying that they have certain moral rights, they're actually stealing from God to say that he doesn't exist, or while they're saying he doesn't exist. The E stands for evil. They're saying there's too much evil in the world. Well, there can't be evil unless there's good, and there can't be good unless God exists, not in an objective sense anyway. So
there can't be evil unless there's good, and there can't be good unless there's God, by definition. So, who wouldn't be convinced? Just because you've defined your God as the ultimate standard of good doesn't mean anything to anyone who doesn't already accept your position. And words, the idea of saying that you need to account for good or evil is as strange to me as it is to say account for hot and cold, right? Account for left and right. I mean, these terms are relative. The relativity of them is built into the language. The fact that one is relative to the other. Good is good relative to things that are not as good. Bad, you could say, or evil if you really wanted to go to the extreme bad. Hot is hot relative to things that are colder. Left is, as a direction, exists relative to the other alternative. So saying that you don't have evil unless you have good, you don't have good unless you have God, is all just blind assertion. It's not made with any kind of evidence. It's just, you're preaching to the choir if you're talking to a bunch of Christians, but if you're talking to anyone else, saying that you need God to have goodness as a concept doesn't mean anything. It's not persuasive in the least. There is a real problem with morality, is that theists and atheists don't see eye to eye on the concept at all. You have, on the one hand, a top-down model where you need an authority figure creating the rules and then enforcing them over the people farther down the chain, sort of hierarchical model where the boss is in charge. And then the bottom-up model where you have, you build it, where you have to build it. And so, when you have something like, your typical atheist believing that the moral systems, the moral beliefs that we hold have been constructed by us as a means to better live within societies, to better live within groups. If we didn't live within groups, morality would be next to meaningless. It would probably be meaningless
anyway. So when atheists are complaining about evil, they're actually proving God exists, because God, by definition, is the ultimate standard of good. So they're stealing from God in order to argue against him. And finally, the S is science. The atheists are saying, well, we're the champions of science. Science is impossible if atheism is true. Why? Because if materialistic atheism is true and we're just moist robots, then we can't really know anything about the real world. We can't depend on the cause and effect nature of reality because there is no mind behind it. We have no warrant to believe anything we learn from science if atheism is true. You know what makes science possible? God. So when they're doing science, they're actually stealing from God in order to argue against him. Now,
I see it differently. I mean, I would say that without a God to interfere, I see nothing with the power to break or alter uniformity. So the idea that you'd need a God to make things uniform, I actually think it works the other way. I think that God, who supposedly has omnipotence, he's superpowers basically, he has the ability to alter the universe any way he sees fit. So if a God exists, I think that we have less reason to believe that the universe would be uniform, because then we know that there's an agent out there capable of altering uniformity. Without that agent, it seems that it must be more likely that the universe would be uniform than if there were agents capable of fussing with it. So, I mean, if you want to compare one worldview to the other and say within which worldview do you have greater warrant for accepting uniformity, I think that it's ours, it's mine, the so-called atheist materialist worldview, not his. And the term precision, when he says precision, what he's meaning is probably, like I said, the fundamental constants. He's talking about why does the universe allow for life, especially human life. And I mean, in almost 100% of the universe, it doesn't. I mean, right? I mean, we're a rare thing. Life, period, is a rare thing. Human life, even more so. So to look around the universe and see a universe that is almost completely void of life, and to say that because there is some life rather than none, is and to use that and to try to argue for one specific Hebrew deity of X time period, it's strange. But this whole thing boils down to an argument from ignorance, that if you don't have God, then you don't have an explanation. That you need this omnipotent agent, because the omnipotent agent has the ability to explain anything. So as soon as you have the omnipotent agent, you have an explanation, and without that agent, you don't have an explanation. The problem is that it's not an explanation. It's a pseudo-explanation. It's what appears at first to be an explanation without actually explaining anything. We're just told this thing, this being, this creature exists who can do anything, and if you don't have him, then you don't have an explanation. Well, maybe we don't have an explanation, and so be it. You might know Frank Turek from the various debates he's been in. You can look him up on YouTube and find him all over the place. He's one of these fast talker types who, if you just slow him down and break down each individual point that he's making, there's not a whole lot to it.
Oftentimes, as we seek to defend our faith, we're told that we're intolerant. Can you just help us in a nutshell know how we can answer people who say that we're intolerant as Christians?
Well, my approach is to use questions whenever I can, not only to gain information, but also in maneuvering conversations. It also takes the pressure off of me when I ask the question. In that case, when somebody calls me intolerant, I know something that's going on here that they don't know. They think I'm intolerant because I think I'm right. But they think they're right too. Everybody who believes something thinks they're right. But only one side is getting called a name.
I can think of one area where this term tolerance gets used pretty much more than any other, and that's with regard to homosexuality. And there are quite a few names that people are called other than Christians. The main reason why Christians are asked or expected to be tolerant is that their views on homosexuality are so backward and anti-modern. So when you have beliefs that are anti-society, anti-peace and love and all that kind of good stuff, I mean, we want to build, most of us want to build societies that are more accepting of the fact that people have differences and that that's okay.
So when they say, well, you're intolerant, Koukl, I say, well, what do you mean by that? Now I want them to give me a definition, because I know once they give me a definition that they're going to fall under the definition too, okay? They say, well, you think you're right. Well, I do think I'm right, but let me ask you the question, do you think you're right? I mean, you're opposing me, obviously. Do you think your views are right? What's he going to say? He can't say, I think all my beliefs are wrong. Of course he thinks he's right. Why is it then, I ask, that when I think I'm right, I'm intolerant, but when you think you're right, you're just right? What am I missing here? Now, this is not meant to be like a total gotcha. I mean, it is a gotcha in a certain way, but it's meant not to embarrass the other person. It's meant to help that person see that all he's doing is calling me a name. Instead of addressing the issue, he's attacking my character, you know? It'd be the same thing as if you called me ugly or something. It doesn't get us anywhere, and I want him to see that. He's got ideas that he thinks are right. I have ideas I think that are right. Why don't we talk about who's right, rather than just firing character challenges at each other? That's the way I would go about dealing with that issue.
Well, I agree, of course. Everybody does believe that the beliefs that they hold are the right ones. And I would agree that tolerance as a meme can be misunderstood. But the reason that people are asking or expecting tolerance is that Christians have been so intolerant. And Christians are famously intolerant from the pulpit. You know, they'll get behind the pulpit and say horrible things about gay people, or, you know, gay people is just the easiest example, but it's about, if you're going to preach about holiness and righteousness and being godly, you know, then there has to be an enemy, and the enemy is anything you can point to and say it's other than this good type behavior, and this good type behavior will be the kind that is most innate and how would you say, cherished in some sense by your tribe.
Tolerance presents a danger to the church, doesn't it? And
well, it's evil. Tolerance is evil. You cannot truly meet anyone who lives a tolerant lifestyle. It's one thing I like about Christianity. You can live out Christianity. You can't live out tolerance. The reason is, tolerance says all values, beliefs, lifestyle, claims to truth are equal. And if you say one value, belief, lifestyle, or claim to truth is greater or lesser than another, you are a bigot and you are intolerant. You made a moral decision. Well, then a person who is truly tolerant can never say to another person that says, I don't believe in tolerance, is wrong. Because tolerance teaches all values. Well, nobody can live that way.
No. Tolerance just means tolerating people with differences of opinion, differences of different lifestyles. That's all it means. What he's thinking of is moral relativism or something similar.
And it's basically, tolerance is there, was first really, I think, conceived to try to bring about world peace. That if everybody was equal, all beliefs, lifestyles, everything was accredited the same equality, we'd have peace. No, you have a worse world situation under tolerance. Second, it was a way to marginalize Christianity. That the cross, right now, is the #1 symbol of intolerance in the world, in every country of the world. The most intolerant person in a university is a Christian evangelist. Why? Because you stand for Christ being the only way. But
as far as world peace, it would certainly be difficult to have world peace without having people be tolerant toward each other, without having people, at the bare minimum, tolerating the existence of people not like themselves. But that's not enough, of course, for world peace. As far as Christianity being marginalized, I think he meant to say marginalized rather than marginized, but maybe. I mean, I don't think so. I think it's just people of other persuasions, and actually Christian American gay people, telling Christians that they want to be recognized as equals in some sense, of equal worth. Not someone you just point to and mock and say, you know, you're going to burn in hell. This is really about Christian pastors and, well, any of those in authority, using those passages in Leviticus, Romans, and there's about 2 or 3, I think, in the whole Bible. But there are some people who just focus on those 3 verses or so as if that's just all the Bible were about. And so you get some pushback from people who say, at the bare minimum, tolerate us, just deal with the fact that we exist, right? And of course, well, I'll get to this in a second.
Nowhere in the Bible does it say to be tolerant. Nowhere. It commands us to love. Mm-hmm. You see, when you tolerate someone, you actually debase them. Mm-hmm. When you love someone, you attribute value, dignity, honor to them. See, you love the person, you critique the thought. Yeah.
That's a weird false dichotomy right there, that when you tolerate someone, you debase them, but when you love them, you rise them up, or whatever it is that he said. People who I love, I also tolerate. People who I can tolerate people I love, and I can tolerate people I don't love, but just because I love someone doesn't mean that I can't tolerate them. And just because I tolerate someone doesn't mean that I can't love them. So it's also, there are degrees, right? I mean, you'd have toleration would be just the bare minimum. You say, I'm going to put up with you. I'm going to put up with you. And that's just all I can do. It's all I can get myself to do. I'm going to tolerate you. Fine. Beyond tolerance, you'd talk about acceptance. You'd say, I don't just accept you, but I don't just tolerate you, but I also accept you. I'm actually okay with who you are. Like, it's okay. And beyond that, you'd have things like love or appreciation, where you actually say, or celebration, where you say, I don't just acknowledge the fact, I don't just tolerate the fact that you're different, I don't just accept you, but I love the fact that you're different. Let's celebrate the fact that you're different. Let's celebrate the fact that we have this diversity of views, diversity of whatever, diversity of lifestyles. So that's the ideal, is where, the average person in the world would say, not everybody's like me, and that's okay. That's not just okay, that's wonderful. Right? That's awesome. And but the solution to saying that tolerance isn't enough is not to say that tolerance is bad. Is to say that tolerance is not enough. That you should go further. So there's a cloudy and I think mistaken message here coming from Josh McDowell. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.